The sun rose over the sleepy coastal town of Pine Harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Nancy Taylor woke up with the dawn, as she had done almost every day for the past 15 years. At 42, she wasn't rich or famous, but she had built a life that felt right for her. Nancy stretched and smiled as her orange tabby cat, Rusty, jumped onto the bed, purring loudly. "Good morning to you too," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. The cat had shown up at her doorstep 3 years ago, skinny and scared. Now he ruled the house like he owned it. Her little home sat just 4 blocks from the ocean. It wasn't much. A small one-bedroom cottage with faded blue paint and a tiny porch where she drank coffee every morning. The wood creaked in certain spots, and the bathroom sink dripped no matter how many times she fixed it, but it was hers. Every mortgage payment felt like a victory. Through the window, Nancy could see her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez watering her prize-winning roses. They waved to each other, a morning ritual neither ever missed. That was the thing about Pine Harbor. Everyone knew everyone, and they looked out for each other. Nancy got ready for work, putting on her navy blue skirt and white blouse. She didn't need fancy clothes for her job as an administrative assistant at Harbor Bridge Engineering. For 12 years, she'd kept the office running smoothly. The bosses came and went, but Nancy remained, answering phones, organizing files, and remembering everyone's birthdays. Her boss, Robert Chen, often said she was the heart of the company. Nancy would just laugh it off, but secretly, those words meant everything to her. Her parents had passed away within a year of each other when she was in her 30s, and sometimes the engineering firm felt like the closest thing to family she had left. Nancy's home wasn't filled with expensive things. The couch had come from a yard sale, the kitchen table from her childhood home. But every item had a story. The collection of seashells on the windowsill, gathered during long walks on the beach. The patchwork quilt her grandmother had made for her. The bookshelf packed with mysteries and romance novels from the used bookstore downtown. On her way to work, Nancy stopped at Polly's Bakery for her usual, a cinnamon roll and coffee. "The usual, honey?" asked Polly, already wrapping up the pastry. "Weather's turning. They say there's a big storm coming next week." "Oh, we get storm warnings all the time," Nancy said with a smile. "Remember last year? Everyone panicked and it barely rained." At the office, Nancy watered the plants, started the coffee machine, and turned on her computer. She hummed as she sorted through yesterday's mail, checked the calendar, and prepared for the morning meeting. Her desk had pictures of Rusty, her parents on their 40th anniversary, and the Grand Canyon trip she'd saved 3 years to take. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Nancy had her health, her job, her cat, and her little blue house by the sea. She had her routines and her dreams. Maybe next year she'd finally visit the Florida Keys. She had enough, and that was plenty. Little did she know that in 5 days' time, everything would change. The hurricane brewing far out at sea would soon upend her carefully built life. But for now, Nancy Taylor smiled at her coworkers, answered the ringing phones, and planned what she might cook for dinner that night. Sometimes the most precious things in life are the ordinary moments we take for granted until they're washed away. The weather reports kept getting worse. For 3 days straight, the local news talked about nothing but Hurricane Dorothy. Nancy watched from her couch as the weatherman pointed at swirling red and orange patterns on the map. The storm had grown from a tropical depression to a Category 3 hurricane, and it was headed straight for Pine Harbor. "You should leave town, dear," Mrs. Rodriguez said over the fence, loading suitcases into her daughter's car. "My Lucia is taking me to stay with my sister in Atlanta until this blows over." Nancy nodded but didn't make any promises. She'd lived through plenty of storms before. Just last year, they'd boarded up windows for nothing. Besides, where would she go? The highways were already jammed with cars. And who would look after the stray cats in the neighborhood if everyone left? "It'll probably turn north like they always do," said Joe from the hardware store when Nancy bought extra batteries and candles. He was taping his windows but didn't seem worried. They always make these storms sound worse than they are. Good for ratings, I guess. Nancy wanted to believe him. She filled her bathtub with water, stocked up on canned food, and made sure she had Rusty's carrier ready just in case. But she didn't pack a bag, didn't make hotel reservations inland. Deep down, she couldn't imagine anything happening to her little blue house. It had stood for 60 years through countless storms. The sky turned an eerie yellowish gray by Thursday afternoon. The air felt heavy, like holding your breath underwater. Wind chimes all over the neighborhood rang frantically, then fell silent as people took them down. The ocean pulled back, as if gathering its strength. That night, Nancy couldn't sleep. The wind started as a whistle, then grew to a howl, then became something she'd never heard before. A roar like a freight train. Rain hit the windows like someone throwing handfuls of pebbles. Rusty hid under the bed and wouldn't come out. Around midnight, something crashed against the house. Nancy grabbed her flashlight, her phone, and Rusty, who she had to drag from under the bed, hissing and scratching. They huddled in the bathroom, the only room without windows. She pulled the shower curtain closed and sat in the dry tub with Rusty in his carrier, wrapped in her grandmother's quilt. The sounds were terrifying. Glass breaking, wood splintering. A horrible groaning noise that Nancy realized was her roof. Water began seeping under the bathroom door. First a trickle, then more and more, cold against her feet. Then came the worst sound, a massive crack overhead. Nancy curled her body over Rusty's carrier as chunks of ceiling plaster fell around them. The bathroom door burst open with the force of rushing water, and the shower curtain rod crashed down. Nancy doesn't remember much after that. Just hanging onto Rusty's carrier with one hand and the bathroom sink with the other as water rose to her waist. Praying harder than she'd ever prayed. The terrible sound of her home being torn apart around her. When the first gray light of dawn came, Nancy found herself standing in what used to be her living room. The roof was gone. One wall had collapsed entirely. Everything was soaked, broken, or simply gone. Her books, her photos, her clothes, all ruined. The quilt her grandmother made, nowhere to be found. The seashell collection, scattered who knows where. Even her car had been carried off its parking spot and smashed against a tree down the street. Water still swirled around her knees, mixed with mud and broken furniture. In her arms, Rusty shivered inside his carrier, mewing pitifully. Nancy stood there, rain still falling on her head, where her roof should have been, wearing the pajamas she'd put on the night before, now the only clothes she owned in the world. The days after Hurricane Dorothy blended together in Nancy's mind. She remembered stumbling through waist-deep water, clutching Rusty's carrier to her chest, following a group of neighbors to higher ground. She remembered the National Guard trucks that eventually came. The cots set up in Pine Harbor High School's gymnasium. The smell of too many damp, unwashed bodies crammed into one space. Name? A tired volunteer asked, clipboard in hand. Nancy Taylor, she answered, her voice strange to her own ears. Address? Nancy opened her mouth, then closed it. Her address didn't exist anymore. For the first 3 nights, she jumped at every loud noise. The squeak of the gym door, someone coughing. The rain that continued to fall, pattering against the roof. Each sound brought back memories of her home coming apart around her. She barely slept, keeping one hand on Rusty's carrier beside her cot. The cat was the only thing she had left from her old life. Technically, we don't allow pets, a Red Cross volunteer had told her, but then looked at Nancy's face and added quietly, but we can make an exception if he stays in his carrier. The shelter had been set up for 50 people. By the 3rd day, it held over 200. Nancy stood in line for an hour each morning to use one of the 4 shower stalls. Another hour for a plate of donated food. Another hour to speak with an insurance representative who told her, with genuine regret in his eyes, that her policy would cover maybe a third of what she'd lost. The storm surge is considered flooding, not wind damage, he explained, as if that meant something to someone who had lost everything. Nancy wore donated clothes that didn't quite fit, jeans an inch too short, a sweatshirt from a university she'd never attended, underwear still in plastic packaging. She kept her few possessions in a donated backpack. A toothbrush, a comb, her waterlogged wallet, and the paperback book she'd found floating near what used to be her kitchen, now swollen to twice its size and unreadable. "You staying with family when we close up here?" asked Donna, the woman on the next cot over. She had 3 small children who orbited around her like satellites, sharing a single coloring book someone had donated. No family nearby, Nancy admitted. She didn't add that she had no family anywhere, not really. Just some distant cousins in Michigan she hadn't spoken to in years. 2 weeks after the hurricane, Harbour Bridge Engineering reopened in a temporary office space inland. The original building had suffered roof damage but was being repaired. Nancy took 3 buses to get there, still wearing the 2 large shoes someone had given her. Her co-workers greeted her with hugs and concern, but she could see they were dealing with their own losses too. "Nancy, we're so glad you made it," said Tricia from accounting, whose own home had been spared the worst. Nancy nodded and tried to smile. She sat at an unfamiliar desk in the cramped temporary office and stared at the computer screen. Her hands shook as she typed, making frequent mistakes she had to go back and fix. She hadn't had coffee in days. Hadn't had a full night's sleep in longer. "Just focus on the essential files for now," her co-worker Tom said kindly, placing a steaming mug beside her keyboard. By lunchtime, Nancy's eyes burned with exhaustion. She'd been staying strong for 2 weeks, not allowing herself to break down. But when she saw her boss, Robert Chen, walking toward her desk with concern in his eyes, something inside her threatened to crack. She straightened her donated blouse and tried to look professional, even though she'd been sleeping on a cot in a high school gym and washing her only set of clothes in a sink each night. "Nancy," Robert said gently, "could I speak with you in my office? Just for a few minutes." Nancy followed Robert to his makeshift office, really just a corner of the temporary space with a folding table and 2 chairs. Her stomach tightened. With so many businesses damaged, layoffs seemed inevitable. She needed this job now more than ever. "Please, sit down," Robert said, pulling out a chair for her. Nancy sat, trying to ignore how her damp shoes squeaked against the floor. Last night's rain had soaked through them as she waited for the bus. "How are you holding up?" Robert asked, his voice gentle. He was in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses. Unlike many bosses, he always remembered employees' birthdays and asked about their families. "I'm fine," Nancy said automatically. The words she'd been repeating to everyone for 2 weeks. "Just a little tired." Robert looked at her for a long moment. "Nancy, we've worked together for 12 years. You don't have to pretend with me." Something about his tone, the genuine concern in it, broke through the wall Nancy had built around herself. To her horror, tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, fumbling in her pocket for a tissue that wasn't there. Robert handed her a clean handkerchief. "It's just been a lot." "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. "All of it." So Nancy did. The words poured out like the floodwaters had poured into her home. She told him about huddling in the bathtub with Rusty, about the roof collapsing, about wading through chest-deep water to reach higher ground, about the shelter and the insurance adjuster and the long bus rides. "The shelter's closing next week," she finished, twisting the now damp handkerchief in her hands. "They're sending everyone to the county facility in Westbrook, but they don't allow pets." "What will you do?" Robert asked. Nancy shrugged, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "I'll figure something out. I always do. Maybe a hotel that takes cats until I can find an apartment, but rental prices have gone crazy with so many people looking." She didn't mention that her savings wouldn't last more than a week in a hotel. "What about insurance?" Robert asked. Nancy gave a bitter laugh. "They're giving me $18,000 for everything. My house, my car, all my possessions. Do you know what that buys these days?" "Nothing." She shook her head. "Sorry, I shouldn't complain. At least I'm alive. Some people weren't so lucky." Robert nodded, his expression thoughtful. "What about family?" "None to speak of," Nancy admitted. "My parents are gone. No siblings. Just some cousins up north I haven't seen in years." They talked for almost an hour. Robert asked detailed questions about her situation, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. What she'd lost. What she needed most. What her plans were. Nancy found herself being more honest than she'd intended. Yes, she was scared. Yes, she was having trouble sleeping. Yes, she worried about Rusty if she couldn't find pet-friendly housing. "I'm sorry to dump all this on you," Nancy said finally, embarrassed by how much she'd shared. "I promise I won't let it affect my work." "That's the last thing you should worry about," Robert said firmly. "You're part of our team, Nancy, one of our most valuable people." As she stood to leave, Robert said, "One more thing. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? There's something I want to discuss with you." Nancy nodded, confused. "Sure." "Good. Let's meet at Rose's Diner at noon. It just reopened yesterday. Walking back to her desk, Nancy felt lighter somehow. Nothing had changed. She still had no home, few possessions, and an uncertain future. But for the first time since the hurricane, she'd told someone the whole truth, and they had truly listened. What she didn't know was that Robert had already started making phone calls the moment she left his office. Rose's Diner smelled like fresh paint and frying burgers. The popular local restaurant had taken on 2 feet of water during the hurricane, but the owner, a tough older woman everyone called Mama Rose, had gutted the place and reopened in record time. A hand-painted sign by the door read, "Pine Harbor Strong." Nancy arrived 5 minutes early for her lunch with Robert. She'd splashed water on her face in the office bathroom and tried to smooth her hair, which she'd been washing with harsh shelter soap for weeks. She still wore the same donated clothes from yesterday, now slightly less wrinkled after hanging them to dry overnight in the gym bathroom. The diner was packed with locals and recovery workers. Nancy spotted Robert in a corner booth and made her way over, dodging waitresses carrying overloaded plates. "Thanks for coming," Robert said, standing briefly as she approached. He wore the same rumpled button-down as at the office, but somehow on him it looked distinguished rather than disheveled. They ordered grilled cheese for Nancy, who picked the cheapest item on the menu, and a club sandwich for Robert. An awkward silence fell after the waitress left. So Nancy said finally, "What did you want to discuss?" Robert took a sip of water as if gathering his thoughts. "Nancy, I've been thinking about your situation. About what you told me yesterday." Nancy's cheeks warmed. "I shouldn't have unloaded all that on you. It wasn't professional." "That's exactly what I wanted to address," Robert said, leaning forward. "You've worked at Harbor Bridge for 12 years. You've never missed a deadline, never called in sick without good reason. You're the first person new employees meet and the one everyone turns to when they need help." He paused. "You're more than an employee, Nancy. You're part of our company family." The waitress arrived with their food. Nancy stared at her grilled cheese, suddenly not hungry. Was this leading to some kind of charity offer? The thought made her uncomfortable. She had her pride after all. "The thing is," Robert continued, "our company owns several properties in town. Investments mostly. One of them is a small house on Willow Street. 2 bedrooms, nothing fancy. It had some minor water damage from the hurricane, some carpet that needs replacing, a bit of drywall work, but the structure is sound." Nancy nodded, not sure where this was going. "We've been using it as temporary housing for visiting engineers," Robert explained. "But right now, it's empty, and it will stay that way for a while since we've postponed all consultant visits until the town recovers." He took a breath. "I'd like to offer you the house, Nancy, at a very nominal rent. Something like $200 a month, just to make it official on the books. You could stay there until you get back on your feet." Nancy froze, her sandwich halfway to her mouth. "What?" "The company can absorb this easily," Robert said quickly. "It's actually better to have someone living there, keeping an eye on things." "I can't accept that," Nancy said automatically. "It's too much." "It's not charity," Robert insisted. "It's an investment in a valued employee. Besides, there's more to my proposal." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and opened it on the table. "Harbor Bridge Engineering has been planning to expand for months. We've been discussing a new focus on storm-resistant housing designs, something that's obviously needed more than ever now." He slid a document across the table. "We want to create a new position, Community Outreach Coordinator, someone to connect with local residents interested in rebuilding stronger homes." Nancy stared at the paper in front of her. It was a job description, and near the bottom, a salary figure that made her eyes widen. "Your communication skills make you perfect for this role," Robert said. "You know everyone in town. People trust you. And with your own experience of losing a home to the hurricane, you understand exactly what our potential clients are going through." He leaned back, watching her face. "So what do you think? A new home and a new position. Are you interested?" Nancy couldn't speak. She stared at the job description, then at Robert, then back at the paper. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone in the diner could hear it. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Say yes," Robert said with a gentle smile. "We need you, Nancy, and it sounds like you could use a break right about now." "But I don't have experience in this kind of role," she protested weakly. You have 12 years of experience with our company, Robert countered. You know our systems, our values. And more importantly, you know the people in this town. That's worth more than any degree or certification. Nancy took a deep breath. Her mind raced with possibilities. A real house instead of a shelter cot. A job with better pay. The chance to help others who had lost everything, just like she had. Can I bring Rusty? She asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Robert laughed. Of course you can bring your cat. The house has a small backyard too. He might even enjoy it. 2 hours later, Robert drove Nancy to see the house on Willow Street. It was a modest one-story home with light blue siding and white trim. The front yard needed mowing, and there were water stains on the outside walls, but to Nancy it looked like a palace. Inside, the damage was minimal. Some dampness in the carpet, a water line about a foot high on the drywall in the living room. The furniture was basic but functional, a couch, a dining table with 4 chairs, a bed in each bedroom. We'll have a crew replace the damaged drywall and carpet next week, Robert explained as they walked through. The electricity and water are already working. Nancy ran her hand along the kitchen counter. After weeks of eating shelter food, the thought of cooking her own meals made her throat tight with emotion. When can I move in? She asked. Today, if you want, Robert said. I've got the keys right here. He held up a keyring with a small bluefish keychain. The paperwork can wait until tomorrow. Nancy reached for the keys, then hesitated. Robert, I need to ask. Why are you doing this? Why me? Robert was quiet for a moment. You remember my wife, Beth? Nancy nodded. Beth had died of cancer 3 years ago. The whole office had attended the funeral. When I was going through that rough time, you were the one who made sure I ate lunch every day. You rescheduled meetings when I couldn't focus. You even fed my goldfish when I had to take Beth to Houston for treatment. He smiled at the memory. You didn't have to do any of that. It wasn't in your job description, but you did it because that's who you are. He pressed the keys into her hand. Sometimes in life, we get chances to repay kindness. This is mine. By sunset, Nancy had moved in. It didn't take long. All her possessions fit in a single backpack. Robert had surprised her with a few groceries, a set of towels, and some basic toiletries. The company's maintenance supervisor had dropped off a new litter box and cat food for Rusty. The cat explored the house cautiously at first, sniffing every corner. When he finally settled on the couch, purring loudly, Nancy felt something inside her relax for the first time in weeks. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking through the materials Robert had given her about the new position. Community outreach. Helping people rebuild stronger homes. Starting next week, she would visit neighborhoods, talk to families who had lost everything, show them how Harbor Bridge engineering could help them rebuild better than before. As darkness fell, Nancy made up the bed with fresh sheets. No more shelter cot. No more noise from hundreds of displaced people. Just quiet and privacy and the beginning of a new chapter. That night, she slept for 10 straight hours, with Rusty curled against her side. 1 year after Hurricane Dorothy tore through Pine Harbor, Nancy stood in the living room of her home on Willow Street, arranging a tray of cheese and crackers. Sunshine streamed through the windows, catching the new curtains she had sewn herself. Rusty lounged on the windowsill, his orange fur glowing in the light, watching birds in the freshly planted garden outside. The house looked different now. Nancy had painted the walls a soft yellow. Photos hung in simple frames, new memories she'd made over the past year. A bookshelf stood against one wall, half filled with books she'd found at yard sales and the local library's donation bin. Slowly, one item at a time, she had rebuilt her life. Do you think I made enough food? Nancy asked Rusty, who blinked lazily in response. She was nervous. This wasn't just any gathering. It was the 1-year anniversary of the hurricane, and she had invited Robert and several co-workers over for dinner. Her first real housewarming. 3 months after moving in, Robert had called Nancy into his office again. This time, she wasn't afraid. Their weekly meetings had become a highlight, discussing community projects, reviewing designs for storm-resistant homes, planning outreach events. I've been thinking, Robert had said that day. The company doesn't really need this property as a rental. We're planning to sell it. Nancy's heart had sunk, thinking she would need to move again. Then Robert slid a folder across the desk. We'd like to offer it to you first, at a fair price, well below market value. The company can even finance the mortgage if you're interested." Nancy had stared at him, speechless for the second time that year. "You want me to buy this house? To own it?" "You've made it a home already," Robert had said simply. "And your work helping families rebuild has brought in more business than we ever expected. It makes sense for everyone." Now, as Nancy arranged flowers in a vase, flowers from her own garden, she still sometimes couldn't believe how much had changed. In her new role as Community Outreach Coordinator, she had helped dozens of families navigate insurance claims, find reliable contractors, and rebuild homes that could withstand future storms. The knowledge that these houses would remain standing even if another hurricane hit gave her deep satisfaction. Her phone chimed with a text. It was Lisa from the office, running 10 minutes late, bringing extra wine. Nancy smiled. A year ago, she had no phone, no friends to text, nothing but the clothes on her back and a frightened cat. Now she had a home, a community, and purpose. The doorbell rang. Nancy smoothed her dress, a real dress she had bought herself, not a donation, and went to answer it. Robert stood on the porch with a small gift bag. "You're the first one here," Nancy said, ushering him in. "Everyone else is running late." "Gives me a chance to see how the place looks without the crowd," Robert said, glancing around appreciatively. "You've done wonders with it." Nancy gave him a quick tour, pointing out the new kitchen backsplash she'd installed herself after watching online tutorials, the refurbished dining table she'd found at a thrift store and sanded down on weekends. "I have something for you," she said when they returned to the living room. She handed him a wrapped package she hidden behind the couch. "Just a small thank you." Robert unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph of Nancy standing proudly in front of the house, Rusty in her arms, on the day she'd signed the mortgage papers. Beneath the photo was a handwritten note. "Thank you for seeing value in me when I had lost everything." Robert blinked rapidly, clearing his throat. "Well, I always knew a good investment when I saw one," he said gruffly. The doorbell rang again. More colleagues arrived, bearing food and drinks and housewarming gifts. Soon the small home was filled with laughter and conversation. Nancy moved through the crowd, refilling glasses, accepting compliments on her home, introducing people to each other. Late in the evening, she stepped onto her back porch for a moment of quiet. The stars shone brightly above, and in the distance she could see the ocean, calm tonight, beautiful and peaceful. The same ocean that had nearly taken everything from her now looked serene, a reminder that even the most destructive forces could give way to tranquility. Nancy thought about all the families she'd helped over the past year. How many of them had stood, just as she had, looking at the ruins of their homes, thinking nothing would ever be right again. And how many of them were now, like her, building new lives, different, but in some ways stronger than before. The screen door creaked as Robert joined her on the porch. "Penny for your thoughts?" Nancy smiled. "I was just thinking that sometimes the worst storm brings unexpected blessings, like finding out who your real friends are," Robert agreed, leaning against the railing beside her. "And discovering strength you never knew you had," Nancy added softly.